So we are talking about this social constructivism and identity formation, and I was giving the example of how 40 years ago anybody would not have accepted nacho chips as a American cuisine. They would say no, it's not. That comes from south of the border. Now there is not a single sport event that you go now is not that won't get it, that you can't buy some nachos and cheese and say, oh yeah, let me try some of those exotic Mexican food, that nachos and cheese. No, you won't say that. The perception of what culture is and what is American or Tex-Mex, or a mixture or a hybrid can change over time. You are just then socialized to accept this and still view it as something different and outside. Okay, well, that's theories of identity formation for you. However, what I really want to focus on during this week is far more about the modes of integration, right? And integration when mm, or the other people sometimes call incorporations, simply asks a question of how well our newcomers to societies or different groups within the societies, if you have a variety of different cultural groups within the society, now they are fit into a society, right? In the sense of, are they viewed as a problem? Are they viewed as something that need to become part of a larger whole? Or are they, or is the multitude of different cultures encouraged, right? And not seen as a problem? So basically, I think there is two larger modes of integration that one can think of. The first, the first is multiculturalism. The word multiculturalism actually kind of has two meanings. The first one, general sense, um, not the one I really want to focus on too much in class. Is it's rather descriptive, right? It's a descriptive definition. It's just this identification of a society where different cultural groups live together versus a society which is very monocultural. Again, maybe a very monocultural society where everybody speaks the same language is of the same uh, greater percentage, or is of the same race, sorry, as the same ethnic background, believes in the same religion, that would be very monocultural. An example of that would be Japanese society, which seems very monocultural. Not a lot of people fall outside the general mold, as opposed to this, a society such as Switzerland, which has at least four different language groups, different religious groups, many of African countries, which were cobbled together based on European perception of what the border should be, but which really featured people with different language and cultural tradition. So that would be a multicultural society. That is a descriptive side of it. You know, what I really want to focus a lot more, what we would be focusing on is actually the politics. This idea of, are there policies in place to promote and maintain diversity, right? Again, thinking about it on campus, if you got a multicultural center, what does that want to do? Well, it wants to say, well, there may be different cultures here on our campus, people from different countries, people from different ethnicities or races within the society. And we come to understand more about these uh, without simply saying we are all the same, right? People is the point that's being made here, but there is no problem with the assertion of differences, and and that one can learn from these differences. And if you actively promote this, that creates a multicultural center. um, Put funding there for people to express their differences, you are engaging in multiculturalism. And that's, I think, what I want you to understand as this mode of integration. And whether society welcomes this or not is what we are going to see or analyze. Now, the opposite side of this scale here would be assimilation. Assimilation is the sense of wanting to have a single culture, a single national identity that all people should share. And one of the problems for such a single identity would be if people um start to reassert their differences, it becomes a real problem. If you say something like, well, I am an Asian American, and say, no, 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 you are just American. Can't we all just be American? Why don't you want to assert why do you want to assert these differences? Do you want special privileges? Uh, what are you looking for when you are asserting these differences? For us to be a strong singular nation, we need to get rid of all these labels. It's what an assimilationist would say. Let's all identify one common set of values and identify that we have rather than talking too much about our differences. All right. And that's what assimilation is about. And really, this discourages of assertion of differences. Again, a strong example, the country that's like that would be France. Again, one of the ways that we see that is the very rigorous in trying to protect one single language, institute in place to make sure that only French words come into vocabulary. But they also discourage the assertion of religious difference. They're going to say, keep your religion in the household. But when you come public, take off that headscarf. So, not being very open towards that. And in the olden days, come up, up until very recently, last few years, they also didn't take census data on racial differences or immigration background because they said, look, once you're in France, we are all the same. We don't want to focus on differences here. To put this towards a continuum, right? You got to um, assimilation over here, on this side, and wanting a single society, wanting a single society here on the right hand side, and and maybe also punishing or creating a differences or at least creating benefits for special incentive to be part of a dominant culture and saying that's a good thing. In the middle, you have tolerant multiculturalism, means a tolerance of differences. I think if assimilation is over here, France pretty assimilated. Some aspects of US is might be somewhat a tolerant culturalism. Only some aspect. You are not forced in the school to speak English. There are some concession made, but also in your private life, they don't say, well, if you go to mosque, you have got a problem in US. Again, you might say, well, some people believe that. Yeah, that's true. But what I'm talking about, the national policy, you can't be discriminated against in the US, not legally, based on your race or on your religion. So, so it's this idea that it's fairly tolerant multiculturalism. This kind of society tends to put non-discrimination laws in place and kind of say that's good enough. That's enough to create multiculturalism here. On the far left here, you have affirmative mm, multiculturalism, which means not only tolerating multiculturalism, it not only saying, well, we are going to be a single, we are not going to be a single monoculture, but saying we are going to have active policies that allow groups that are somewhat different either immigrate group coming in or ethnic groups that are already in difference within the society to keep reconfirming and redeveloping their cultural identities. So it's not only tolerating but also actively developing them or reconfirming them. And again, I kind of mentioned probably incorrectly the fact that maybe we have English as a second language, right, in schools. So we have system. If you come here speaking Spanish, now maybe not every language that students come in with, but certainly for Spanish there are most school system the opportunity to also to at the early years also receive some of your education in your native language until you learned English well enough to be in the classroom with English speakers, right? So that would be, actually in affirmative step to say we understand there is multicultural society and we want to support it to a degree that we can put our money towards it, to hire teachers who are bilingual, to provide programs here. But in many other ways, US doesn't really go that far to support multiculturalism. So that's why I say overall US has many different kinds of policies. But overall, if you put all the bags of policies together, the US has it more like integrationist, like whereas several other society they really assert these differences. They might think about Nigeria where they divided divide politics along ethnic lines, or certain European countries where they create special commissions for groups or foreigners to get some kind of representation in the government based on the country they come from. That would be a totally opposite of what France does. um, in France, once you come here, we are all French. Other society might say, no, once you come here, maybe you want to be part of Muslim caucus or something like that. And government actually provides for that, gets resources based on that. So that would be more of a affirmative multiculturalist point of view. So those are, if you're going to be, I mean, writing on those are the three aspects when you will be looking at policies, whether they are a little bit more of assimilationist, more maybe they are central tolerance, or whether they are actually affirmative uh, multicultural. All right, that's the general segment of the discussion. Now let's focus a little bit on our case. One of our case here is Nigeria, and Nigeria, a country which is we have already talked about a little bit, having at least three larger ethnic groups: the Hausa, the Hibu, and the Yoruba. Okay, and that being part of its history, this fact that from the north there was settlement by the Fulani Empire, the Islamic Empire that came down from the north, and European settlement came from the south, coming from the sea, to create groups that are more Christian, and then there are groups that are more animist. They all have different language. Well, what we see in Nigeria, unfortunately, is a lot of ethnic conflict, but it's a lot more complex than just these ethnic conflict between the three major groups that we pointed out. Sure, there are three major groups, but there are over 200 minor groups based on tribal lines, and then these three larger kind of religious difference, or three larger language groups. There are also smaller language and dialects there. So you could say have conflicts between three major groups. Sure, that occasionally happens, like in the case of Biafra region war, where the entire region was set against the other two regions of the country, but other times you might face or you might have it between those three major groups or smaller groups or between the minority groups themselves.